Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. Today we have another round of leaks. This time we're looking at the assault phase, essentially how units charge, how they fight, as well as some extra special rules and psychic powers, that last of which I'm actually really impressed by. But before we get into it, a quick reminder that the Blackbriar Gaming Discord and Patreon are now live. Check the video description below for links to both. As always, a huge thank you to my Patreon members. You're the ones making this channel possible. Alright, back into it. So we had some leaks yesterday. That was a wild time, a lot around the Force Organization chart, which we now know more of because of the article that's dropped. And now we have a second round of leaks. Now, I don't know if these leaks came out at the same time or if they came out a little later. I certainly didn't see them the first time round, hence why we're here in this video. And I dare say there's some other people who haven't seen them either. Now, I've read through all of these, so I have a pretty good idea of what they're up to. However, they are very wordy, and that's something we see with the rules in general of this new edition, is they're very wordy, but also kind of tight in the way that they're written. There's very little room for ambiguity like there was in a bunch of the rules in 2nd edition. So while they seem long and wordy and over the top, I think GW is attempting to close out any loopholes or confusion to make sure we all understand what's going on. But let's get into it. Okay, so here we have the first page of the rules. There's about 10 or so pages, I think, maybe a few more, where we start to get into how to charge. So here we have the first page of the rules, which talks about charges and statuses, declaring targets, checking line of sight, maximum charge range, and making step-up moves. Now that last one is very different to what we know previously in Horus Heresy, but I'll go through them. The charges and statuses, nothing overly exciting. Essentially, it talks about disordered charges for those with tactical statuses, stunned or suppressed specifically, and then other penalties they will suffer in this fight subphase if they have any of the other statuses. Interestingly, it does not talk here, and this is confirmed later on, that if a unit is routed and charged, they are not wiped out. But we'll get into that a little more later. Declaring target and checking line of sight is nothing overly interesting. You have to have line of sight, and it has to be within 12 inches, which is an interesting number, and we'll talk about why soon. But then we get into I guess because of this reason, you make the setup, I should say, not step up, making the setup moves. So within 12 inches, depending on your initiative plus your movement, whether that being between 1 and 20, you have the opportunity before you make your charge roll to move between 1 and 6 inches. This is like a pre-move. And you can either choose to get in base contact with this move if you're within them. So for most Space Marines, for instance, with their movement, I imagine still of 7, unless we see that change, and their initiative of 4 will be having that I plus M of 11, which will allow them to make a setup move of 3 inches. So if you're within 3 inches of an enemy unit and you can move 3 inches to get into base contact, then you are considered in assault, and that will affect the piece that comes next. But you do that first. Obviously your initiative's very high, you're moving up to 6 inches in that setup move, which is where I guess that 12-inch maximum charge range comes into it, because you're only rolling essentially 1 dice for assault now. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So we make the setup move. Lots of rules about setup move. It's really just talking about the fact that you can use this to get into contact with enemy models if you want, but you don't have to. You then go into making volley attacks. Now, before we get there, I wanted to talk quickly about this little box on disordered charge here. The most exciting thing that comes out of here is that a unit, hang on, where is it? Any unit that is disembarked from another model in the same turn as it is a charge declared for it, must make a disordered charge. Now, we see the assault vehicle rules a little later on that talk about how they remove this penalty, but what this means is that units disembarking from any transport, not just that with an assault vehicle, can assault in the turn it disembarked. It simply makes a disordered charge. And a disordered charge is actually, it's pretty punishing. So you don't want to be doing that if you don't have to. But the Rhino Rush, people, the 3rd edition 40k style Rhino Rush, I think that was the edition where it was famous, or was it like 5th edition? Either way, it is back. You can pack a bunch of Marines into cheap rhinos, go zooming up the table, jump out, and pile into a slightly ineffective combat. A bit of fun, and it makes sense. You're not getting out of a rhino and then just standing there looking at the enemy if you're an assault-orientated unit. So love to see it, like to see that roll back. More than happy for units to be jumping out of rhinos and other transports, maybe out of drop pods, for instance, and then assaulting in. We don't know that drop pods one. That's just some supposition. But let's talk about volley attacks. So now, and I do remember this from a previous edition of 40k, I think, it's as you're charging into combat, you have the opportunity both as the charging unit and as the unit being charged to make a volley attack. And what that lets you do is use any assault weapons that you have to make a shooting attack. Now, those shooting attacks are made at snapshots, but we know that regular Marines now with their ballistic skill of 4, and the ballistic skill being the important part here, actually make snapshots on a 5+, so a bit better than what we've seen previously from snap shooting, and can only be done with assault weapons. So tactical Marines now have a use for that bolt pistol they're carrying around with them, for instance, and as I think assault weapons have got much more powerful because of this. So I like it from that perspective. It gives a bunch of weapons purpose that may not have had it otherwise, and it means you're shooting on the way in. Now it'll be interesting to see if units can. There's a word called rush, which I imagine means moving in the shooting phase and then assault and still use their assault weapons to shoot. I don't know how that's all going to work, but there's going to be a lot more shooting going on the table than there has previously, because it's almost like a second fun little shooting phase that's happening in the assault phase. Is it slightly more complex and adds another time delay onto your games? Yeah, kinda. Is it kind of narratively fun and cool? Yes, I think so. So not only are you dedicated to making an Overwatch reaction to be able to shoot a unit coming into you, you will always be able to shoot at them as they charge in with that snap firing shot. However, and this might be on the page over, there we go, Overwatch reactions. If you do make an Overwatch reaction, your volley attack then is no longer made at snapshots and can be made with weapons other than those that just have the assault trait. So that's how Overwatch reaction works, but otherwise your units will always be making a kind of attempt at a Overwatch with the volley attack that's less effective than whether you're doing a proper reaction. So that's nice, and it's good for gunline units. They won't simply stand there doing nothing as they're charged into. Now we get into, once again, more complexity. Yes, but is it a bit more narratively focused, and does it give me a bit more what I expect to be seeing on a battlefield? Maybe, I guess. Well, so that's fun. But making the charge move. Okay, there's a lot going on here, but the general gist is that you now roll 2 dice and pick the highest. That's what that entire first paragraph means, and this is why I'm talking about those more wordy rules that we're seeing in this rulebook. It will be, I think, a challenge to read through it the first time. But I've been finding that even though I've had to reread a couple of things and I'm seeing a bunch of repetition in the rules, the reason they've done it is really just to tighten them up, to leave absolutely no confusion, except for, I guess, the confusion of having to read that many words, but to leave no confusion as to the intent of the rule and how the rule works. Lots more words, but I think a much tighter game system coming in the 3rd edition. People will have their own feelings about that, I am sure. But making charge move, the general idea is you're only moving up to 6 inches. So you're rolling 2 dice, picking the highest, and that's how far you're moving, which is obviously shorter than what we saw previously in 2nd edition, where it was getting that bonus depending on how far you can move, as well as rolling the 2d6. Now, you did get that setup move before, which for normal Marines will be 3 inches. So you'll be moving between 4 and 9 inches in your assault. So from that perspective, it's actually more consistent, and the averages will actually look pretty good, but it means you're not going to get those real Hail Mary long assaults off of 12 inches and such. I see here that charge moves are not affected by difficult terrain. I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere. I'm not going to read through this all now, but I believe that is the case, which means that enemies won't be able to hide in terrain and use that to avoid charges. But there we go. That's the main thing I wanted to talk about from charge moves. Read through that at your leisure. You'll start to see the repetition really coming through in this one. It's hilarious. Another fun is a word. Another aspect of this rule is that if you fail a charge, you actually become stunned if you then fail a cool check. So you do get punished for failing a charge, which is rough because you're already really getting punished for failing the charge in the first place. But I guess they're punishing you for taking that risk, and you then have the opportunity to be stunned and left out in the open to be countercharged. And I'll remind you that when you are stunned, when you have that status, I believe that results in a being, let's see, disordered charge. Unit that includes models stunned or suppressed is conducted as a disordered charge. So that will then, I believe, mean you're striking at initiative 1. If you then get counter-assaulted in the next turn. So pretty rough. But let's move on. All right, now we get into resolving an initiative step that is actually fighting. And there's like, how many steps to it? It's like 10 steps or something ridiculous to this initiative step. And once again, that's what I'm talking about. These rules are very prescriptive. They're very detailed. They do not want anyone to get confused about what's going on in this game. You'll know exactly what you meant to do and when you meant to do it. This all comes down to you've made your charge, you're successfully in, now you attack each other. This happens kind of the same as 2nd edition. There wasn't anything interesting, I think, that I really read here. Let's see, make wound tests, that's all about the same. These strike groups essentially represent numbers of dice that represent different weapons that you roll at different times. They've just been really detailed and precise on how it works, just so no one gets it wrong. Saving throws, damage mitigation, that's all kind of the same. There's a bit about vehicles in here and armor penetration with vehicles from combat. So you're always hitting a vehicle's rear armor in combat. And if you do penetrate it, it does get that chance to make saving throws and or damage mitigation rolls. I guess there's going to be ways for vehicles to get feel no pains or invulnerable saving throws or whatever that looks like. Maybe, we don't know. Maybe vehicles have armor saves now. Who can say? Either way, it does specifically note that if glancing hits are made, there is no saving throw, damage mitigation, etc. Because I read that initially in the first batch of leaks, and I was like, have they missed it? Have they accidentally said saving throws and damage mitigation don't happen for glancing, and were they actually meant to? Well, this confirms to me that no, glancing hits do not get chances to have that damage mitigation roll, saving throws, etc., whether it be from cover or whatever we're talking about. That's from shooting, of course. It wouldn't be getting cover and assault. But yeah, so glancing hits just go through. Penetrating can be stopped from who knows how kind of ways. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But let's move on here. We then go into removing casualties. Nothing overly exciting here, same kind of stuff. We talk about a massacre, so if a unit's completely wiped out, they can make a consolidation move. It'll work in a similar way. This piece here, the actual fighting, I think will feel very similar to 2nd edition, noting that challenges will be happening separately and in their own special way. All right, combat resolution. Things get a little different here. So you get 1 combat resolution point for each enemy model removed as a casualty, as well as the player who controls the most models in the selected combat gains 1 point as well. The result of challenges can grant combat resolution points. Not sure how that works. We'll find out eventually, I'm sure. And war gear and special rules can contribute to it. So you then have a winner. You then have a panic check, which is a leadership check with a negative modifier to it by the amount of resolution points that you lost by, I imagine. Let's see, is applied as a negative modifier. Yep, the difference between the combat resolution points is a negative modifier. Yep, that's pretty standard, pretty familiar there. Aftermath. All right, here we go. This is where things get a little different. A unit that includes any model, so the options available are as follows in the aftermath of a combat. All right, here we go. A unit that includes any models with the routed status must fall back. So if you've failed your leadership check, you are routed and you're falling back. Any unit that does not include any models with the routed status may choose to hold, disengage, noting that you can only disengage if you did lose the combat, or fall back. Now, what I thought was interesting was that falling back was not specific to units that had lost the combat. So if you win the combat, and I could be wrong here, but it appears that if you win the combat, you can still choose to fall back, which is hilarious. But sure. Also, if all enemy units are falling back or disengaging, the player that won the combat may choose to have any unit under their control in the combat pursue, gun down, or consolidate. More shooting. there's more shooting, people. In the assault phase, you can shoot numerous times. Alright, aftermath options. So, you can hold. All models in a unit that hold must make an immediate pile-in move, and if any of its models are in base contact with an enemy model, the unit remains locked in combat. I imagine that's when a bunch of casualties have been taken to make sure that you're still getting into and continuing that assault, that combat, I should say. Now, disengage. This is an interesting one. So this is moving out of combat. So if you've lost the combat, you don't want to be in it anymore, but you did pass your leadership check, you may choose to disengage. And you do so at a distance equal to the model's movement characteristic. This move can be made in any direction, blah, 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 talks about a bunch of stuff, unit coherency, etc. You then, let's see, routed status. If you can't get out of base contact with the enemy, you can move through enemy models here and have to move at least 2 inches away from an enemy model. Assuming normal Marines is still movement of 7, you're moving quite far away. Now, other miniatures with movement larger than 7 can disengage significant distances. There's then the fallback piece. All models in the unit gain the routed status. So once again, if you win a combat and you choose to fall back, which appears like something you can do, you then gain the routed status if you didn't already have it, which you wouldn't in that case. Units with the routed status must then make an immediate fallback move. Amazing. All right. Yep. Very good. Okay. So you're still only falling back once if you do that. And then consolidate. All models in the unit may move a number of inches equal to their initiative characteristics, and at least 2 from any enemy model. Gun down. The unit may make a shooting attack. That's right, another shooting attack in the assault phase, targeting any one enemy unit that has fallen back from the selected combat. So if they've fallen back or they've disengaged, either one of the two, you don't have to chase them. You can just stand and shoot at them. It is a volley attack, however, so it can only use weapons with the assault trait and would be using, I imagine, snapshots. Or you can pursue. Roll a single dice for each unit that has been chosen to pursue. Each model in a pursuing unit must move a number of inches equal to their initiative characteristic, added to the result on the dice that you rolled. So anywhere from 5 to, what are we talking about, 10 inches for a normal Marine squad. And essentially you're moving towards the unit that made that fallback move. Now this is where things get a little different. If any model from the unit that is pursuing ends its move in base contact with an enemy model, then it is considered to have made a successful charge and is locked in combat with the unit that includes that enemy model. Even if that enemy model was routed and had just fallen back, it is no longer wiped out. So what we're looking at here, and we've seen it a couple of times in the rules, is that it appears that Games Workshop is trying to get rid of those really swingy, high variance, feel bad moments, whether it be vehicles exploding or in this case, units getting chased down. There's nothing worse than failing a leadership check by 1 after a combat where only a few Marines died and having a big squad run down and wiped off the table. So it appears that Heresy is going for, and these are Marines, right? They're not going to just run away like cowards and then get cut down and not do anything about it. So they've, look, maybe humans do that, right? Maybe there'll be specific rules around that. Basic, tragic humans, but not Marines, not post-humans. So the rules have kind of brought that into it, and they're going to move away from that feel bad moment so that if your unit runs away but is chased down, yes, it's still in combat. Yes, you're, under all of the penalties of having a status applied to you while in combat, but you aren't just automatically dead. And I quite like that. I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I'm sure some people will be upset about that, feel that it's not punishing enough, feeling that it's maybe hurting assault armies, and they may not be incorrect in this case. But I would much rather see that than big units, just wiped off the table. Heresy is a game about these really big units of Marines, right? Tons of Marines on the table. But the rules in 2nd edition didn't really encourage that. And certainly not when a unit of 20 Marines could just get chased down that easily. But we have more to look at. So that's the assault piece. There's some interesting stuff in there, a bunch of different stuff, a lot of words to say essentially it's similar to 2nd edition with a few little changes here and there. And I say little changes, but look, there are actually some significant changes on how the things work, from that setup move to volleys to the way that you can then pursue or gun down. So things have changed, but the fighting will feel pretty familiar. Now let's get into some special rules that we've come through with this leak. So the first one, and this is an interesting one, is the line special rule. Line X. A unit of models with this special rule can control objectives more easily and scores more victory points from controlling an objective. So the first piece there that's really interesting is that it appears that all miniatures now, all maybe infantry, but I'm thinking it might actually be all units can hold objectives. Maybe vehicles can't. We don't know that. It'll probably be, mentioned in some kind of trait or special rule piece that vehicles can or can't hold objectives. But certainly all infantry, it is implied here, unless of course they have a tactical status, can in fact hold objectives, which I think is a good change. I think just units with line being able to hold objectives was quite punishing to certain army builds. It encouraged people taking units they might not necessarily care that much about. That whole, tactical squad tax that you had to pay to then, before you could do interesting things, and painting up 20 Marines that you may not really want to. Whereas this way, it looks like all infantry just going to be holding objectives. But those with line are going to do it a whole lot better. So if a unit that controls an objective includes a majority of models with the line special rule, lots of rules, blah, 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 essentially that number that's in that X with that line special rule gives you extra victory points. So in this case, a normal unit, hold an objective worth 1 victory point, but if it was line 3, it would get 4 victory points. That's pretty wild. Furthermore, the value of X is added to the tactical strength of a model, so that's each model that has that special rule to determine its ability to control objectives. So that might mean that certain objectives require a certain tactical strength to hold them, or it might mean that objectives are contested in a way that whoever has the greater tactical strength holds that objective if there's 2 units on it at the same time, as opposed to just simply no one getting it in a contested manner. So there's going to be a bit more objective play and a bit more thinking and strategy around how people are holding objectives, what they're using to hold objectives, but then at the same time, people being able to take the armies they want, in that line isn't necessarily required, but is certainly a significant benefit. So a bit more flexibility in this rule, but lots of opportunity as well. We can see actually a few other little rules off to the side. The word officer there, I think, is applying to the rule that gives the Centurion the ability to take more detachments. I could be wrong, I don't know, but that's my guess. Here we've got some more special rules. So we have Armorbane. Now, people have been guessing what Armorbane has done. For a while there, I thought maybe it was what was giving the Melter the ability to double its wounds, but no, that is a Melter-specific rule. Armorbane is separate. There will not be damage for las cannons. We do not have to stress about that. And all Armorbane does now is count glancing hits as penetrating hits. So it's essentially giving +1 strength, right? A weapon with this special rule can never inflict a glancing hit, and any roll that would force them to do so maybe some kind of shield, etc., instead it inflicts a penetrating hit. So it's certainly not as good as maybe a reroll would be. Rerolls, for the most part, seem to have disappeared from this game. I know the shred rule, for instance, has changed, which I'm very okay with. But here we've got just adding +1 strength. So not overly, good, sure, but not hugely powerful, not absolutely crippling. You've then got Assault Vehicle, which I talked about before, which is that special rule that allows models to disembark and charge without penalty. Nice, but that does confirm again that models jumping out of rhinos can still charge, which is great. You've got Auto Repair, which a model with this special rule has a bonus to repair tests to remove statuses. The glancing hits apply statuses. So whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, 6, I can't remember exactly what they are between stunned, suppressed, and pinned, but vehicles can now get those tactical statuses, and what this does, they then have a chance to remove them on a 6. That's pretty much every vehicle, from my understanding, but this auto repair makes some vehicles better at doing it. So let's say Land Raiders might have this, so that they're getting rid of those statuses on a 4+, maybe, because 4+ is the example it gets here, but maybe it's better. Maybe Land Raiders have auto repair 3+. Who knows? Either way, vehicles will not necessarily be utterly crippled by those glancing hits, because some of them might have auto repair. Now, Barrage, similar-ish. This is about attacking without line of sight, uses scatter dice, which is all pretty familiar. However, when a weapon makes more than a single attack with a indirect scatter roll being made for each attack. So you don't have to do that thing that you used to do where you're flipping templates on the first one that lands. Instead, you are just making a scatter dice roll for each of the shots that this barrage weapon has. I don't think much has changed here, but that's a good example of how the rules are just getting a little neater, a little more tightened up. A good example is squadrons of vehicles seem to be going away, right? Because they were just clunky, they were just awkward, and this edition seems to be stripping those awkward rules out and just making things a little more streamlined and a little easier to play from that perspective. And then we've got Battlesmith here. I'm pretty sure that's about using intelligence to repair vehicles, but it looks like it actually cuts off this special rule before we find out really what it does. But that's fine. We can assume it is to repair things, right? All right. Moving on from these special rules, because now we're getting into the real spice, which is about psychic abilities. First thing here, you've got them divided between psychic weapons, psychic powers, and psychic reactions. Psykers gain the Psyker trait, and this is all about making things really specific so you know exactly what's going on. And here's a bunch of rules about how those all work. The main thing is that psychic weapons do not require what they call manifestation checks, psychic checks, essentially. They just have them. They can just use them. And I think this is such a great change. You'll see in a minute that other psychic users, librarians, whatever you want to call them, are able to also just have a benefit they get all the time, once again, without having to make those psychic checks. Willpower checks against their willpower. So they're going to be a lot more consistent. There's going to be much lesser risk of Perils of the Warp with these models. And even then, the Perils of the Warp isn't as bad most of the time. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. So it goes through psychic powers here. Essentially, you may not use more than one psychic power for a unit under their control. What else? Does not stop a model from moving, making shooting attacks, or conducting charges in combat. A model that is in reserves, embarked on another model or otherwise, cannot use psychic powers or psychic reactions. All pretty standard stuff we expect. Psychic reactions is really interesting, so that's a new type of thing you can do. Although I do believe in second edition there were a bit of ums and ahs about whether you could use psychic powers to shoot in shooting reactions. It was all a bit messy and a bit gross. But here we have actual psychic reactions, which are very purposefully made for that reason. You've then got Blessing and Curses, which is about either making buffing or debuffing units, essentially. I won't go deep into those because there's much more spice coming. So Perils of the Warp comes about when you roll doubles on your manifestation checks. Is that what we call them? When you try to I think manifestation checks is the wording they've used here. Yep, there we go. And resistance checks as well. Interesting. Now, if you roll double one, yes, the check passes, but you then get that warp rupture, which you can see on the right-hand side of the page there, which you also get if you roll double six. If you roll double two, double three, double four, or double five, you only get that etheric or feedback where the unit gains the stun status, which isn't great. The psychic power still gets off. Stun status isn't overly fun, means you can't make reactions, and all the other penalties that go with it, including not holding objectives, it should be noted, but at least you're not blowing up. Warp Rupture, however, essentially you take a number of wounds equal to 13, wild, love the number, minus the willpower characteristic of the model in the unit. So the lower your willpower, the more dangerous Perils of the Warp can be, which is great. That's thematic. That's a bit of fun, but this can be absolutely punishing, so be careful. Alright, so once you've made your manifestation check as required, you've Perils of the Warped or not, we then start to get into the psychic powers and what the different psychic traits look like. So here or disciplines, I should say, the different psychic disciplines. So here we have Biomancy. as you can see with that top dot point there in the box up the top, you simply get the impact strength special rule. Now, we don't know what impact is yet. I think it might kind of be like impact hits, and in this case, made at the strength of the unit. We don't know, but that's just a bonus you get. You don't have to make a check for that. There's no manifestation check, no risk. You just get that all the time, which is nice. You then get this psychic weapon, the Biomantic Slam. Once again, no check for that. You can just use that weapon whenever you want to. Next, Biomantic Rage, a psychic power, which is a blessing. And this allows you is used in the charge subphase to add a bonus to a unit's strength and toughness, +2 to its strength and toughness, but it can't then use volley attacks. So pretty good for the most part, and you can use it either, I think, on your own unit or a unit within 18 inches and line of sight. The rules, as you can see there, it's got a trigger, it's got a focus, it's got a target, it's got a duration, and a process. Really prescriptive. I saw a wonderful line that someone said that they've written the rules like someone's holding a gun to the head of the people playing the game, which I thought was very entertaining, especially when it comes to some of the comments of people and their thoughts about 3rd edition. That almost seems like the case. But just lots of detail in these rules, step by step. I don't mind it at all. All right, divination. Look, it does mean more reading to begin with, but after that, I think it's easier to follow. Divination, you get just the Duelist Edge 2 special rule all the time. You get a Gambit, which is interesting. That is those things that you can use in challenges, which implies that maybe librarians or whatever else, sorcerers, whatever they're called, the traitor version of psychic power using Marines will have either that command or champion piece, right? If they're going to be in challenges. Unsure what that looks like yet. So maybe all consoles do have that command. That would make sense. Subtype, I think they call it. So that's a little tidbit there. Take that one for free. All right, every strike for scene. If the Gambit is selected, the controlling player must make a willpower check. And then all hit tests essentially are achieved on a 2+, regardless of weapon skill of the opponent you're attacking. That's really good. Always hitting on 2+ is wild. And it does say, note that this willpower check cannot inflict perils of the warp. So even within these disciplines, you have certain abilities and powers not taking perils of the warp checks. So your psychic users are going to be a lot more consistent and blowing up a lot less. Foresight's Blessing. This power is used at the start of a shooting attack to grant a unit the precision 5+ special rules. So some kind of similar stuff to what was happening in 2nd edition there. Talks about the process, talks about the triggers. I won't go into it. Moving over to telepathy. All right, the Fear special rule is what you get here. You get a Mind Burst psychic power. You get this Cursed Whispers psychic weapon. But let's look at Mind Burst. This power is used in the movement phase and can force the target to fall back or become routed. That's pretty good and looks pretty familiar. Let's see. Now, the way this works is quite interesting. They automatically fall back no matter what, and then I think they take a leadership check to see if they become routed. It says over in the process on the right there, yep, once that fallback move has been resolved, the leadership check must be made. So they're going to fall back no matter what, so it's that consistency piece, but maybe they then fail a leadership check and become routed. Wild. Once fallback has been made, leadership, does that mean they fall back again? Maybe. Who can say? Regardless, yep, unit that includes the focus may not make a move or rush in the movement phase. So there's a little penalty there on using this power, I imagine, because it's so powerful that you can't move if you do it. Okie dokie. Cursed Whispers is 2d6 shots at range 18, only strength 3, but it's got the stun special rule. So it's all about shutting down the enemy's ability here to make reactions if I believe they take a wound from that weapon. That would be my assumption. So that's telepathy. Pyromancy. Love this. You get the explode special rule. So I don't know if that's a good thing. I guess it is. You're dead anyway. You don't care if you explode, and then you can do a bunch of damage to the enemy around you. So that's kind of fun. You just burst into flames. You've got a psychic weapon, Wildfire, there, which is a big pie plate that you're chucking down on someone with Panic 1. So that's -1 to their leadership, I believe, and forcing a leadership check, which could result in routed. If a wound is taken, it's strength 4, AP 4. And then you've got that psychic weapon. Once again, psychic weapons not requiring manifestation checks, with a whole bunch of attacks at strength 5, AP 4, with deflagrate 5. So lots of potential to kill lots of things with that. Probably not if they're wearing power armor, but we're not always fighting Marines, people. So that weapon could be really handy as well. Then we get into telekinesis. This is great. You just have the Shrouded 4+ special rule. And I imagine you give that to the unit that you're with. I don't know that for sure, but I think that's a pretty easy assumption to make. You also have this Force Barrier Psychic Power, which gives you a 3+ Shrouded damage mitigation during when you are the target of a shooting attack. This is a psychic reaction that we're seeing here. And it can be either in the shooting or assault phase, because shooting is now a thing in the assault phase. Sure. And then you've got the Immovable Force Psychic Weapon, where, once again, that AP of 4, so nothing overly deadly from the Psychic Weapons perspective on Marine action, but this one has pinning too. So most of the Psychic Weapons we've seen have had, stun or panic or pinning, so it's all about affecting the enemy forces in various different ways. And this one, of course, having the potential to pin an enemy unit if you manage to get a wound through. Lastly, we have Thaumaturgy. I don't really know how to pronounce that, but you gain the Hatred Psykers special rule. You're going to love this if you're fighting Thousand Suns. And then it's about bringing one of your models back to life. This with Resurrection. This power can be used in the shooting phase and can return a single casualty to the unit with all wounds restored. It's a 50% chance to do it. You have to roll a 4 or higher on a dice when you get it off. But hey, that could be nice for a Terminator maybe, or a very elite miniature, if you manage to stand that bad boy back up. And then you've got Tranquility. That's a psychic reaction. And then you've got Tranquility, a psychic power. Used in the start phase and makes it harder for the target unit to use psychic powers, psychic reactions, or to attack with psychic weapons. So this is about shutting down the psychic powers of your enemy. That's what the Thaumaturgists, or however you pronounce that, are here to do. And that is all the leaks for today. We've looked at charging, we've looked at fighting in combat, we've looked at some special rules, the line one there I think being the most interesting, and we've looked at a bunch of the psychic disciplines. Lots of great stuff coming through. It's interesting really seeing how these rules are written and how detailed they are. That's my main takeaway, as you would have heard. I've mentioned it numerous times. But I'm liking everything I'm seeing so far in these rules. I think they are more complex. I will give you that. They're going to slow down the game a little now that there's multiple shooting that can happen within the assault phase. But it kind of represents things that you would expect to see on the battlefield of the Horus Heresy. So I don't hate it. Games, yes, I think they're going to be a little slower. But I think they're going to be a little more detailed, a little more, and I don't want to use the word realistic, but let's say thematic. And your units are going to be doing what you want them to be doing. But that's enough for now. Thank you for watching. Importantly, make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for Heresy.